This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so good morning, afternoon, and evening, I guess. A lot of folks on the state side are joining in today. Welcome to the first Advanced Schooling Immersion track. We do expect a few more callers to come in, which have been committed to joining this call, but we'll see if they are able to join or not. I would like to go through the meeting notes from the OCP summit to start with, and after that, I've prepared a few documents that I've set up based on the previous interactions from the advanced schooling calls and from the OCP summit meeting. And these documents I would like to go through with all of you and validate whether these are a good basis for starting an assembled documentation for the immersion track. Is there anyone who would like to add something to the agenda for today? Okay, if not, then I'll start walking through the meeting notes from the OCP summit. There are several participants from Facebook, RISE, OCP, Isotope, ProDrive, 3M, CESNAM, and Submer. A lot of the discussion that took place was mostly focused on the contents of the immersion track, to how far it should go and which parts of immersion technology should or should not be covered. The result of this meeting was mostly informational on scoping. A few highlights from the meeting are relevant to share. That's the difference between single phase and two phase. There are some significant differences in the respective technologies concerning the type of materials, wetted material list, but also the densities that can be achieved. Therefore, a separation will have to take place when it comes to the wetted material list and the associated items within immersion. There have been some discussions about board designs and optimizations for it, but also a great demand or a great interest in providing some guidelines for the industry to provide warranty within immersion. Several topics that have been discussed have been related to the harmonization stream, where we can start interconnecting the different systems. As it was discussed, the initial idea was to keep that as a purely separate stream. One of the conclusions that we've drawn is that it is fairly fundamental to align the different work streams from the different advanced cooling tracks, perhaps already in a somewhat earlier stage, just to make sure that we can come up with a holistic underlying water infrastructure inside data centers. There have been a lot of questions on compatibility within data centers when it comes to floor loading and the way to deal with the additional weights or different sizes of solutions. There have been some concerns expressed, and these concerns should be documented in the different documents as well. So some guidelines and best practices on floor loading, but also on ease of implementation. It also seems to be very difficult currently to compare different liquid technologies with each other. Therefore, we have also agreed on that we should try and establish metrics which make it possible and easier to compare different liquid strategies with each other. Things like densities per square meter or per square foot. And we should also be able to establish some targets for all of the providers to achieve based on these type of metrics. Let's see. The density discussion is something that is reoccurring. This is something that is remaining unclear. There is no intention to provide any direction or requirement on achievable energy densities per footprint, at least not yet. And this is something that within OCP there is seems to be an agreement on this. But in this stage, it also doesn't make a lot of sense to provide these targets yet. Also, there is no connection as of this point with the open rec streams. The current focus on the different work streams is to create a black box description, so it does to maintain the possibility for proprietary solutions. The whole work stream is focused on allowing any sort of liquid immersion technology to be compatible with OCP-style data centers. So that means that the different proprietary technologies should be able to supply within the OCP environment. Let's see. There's a few minutes. I think I mentioned most of them. There's another element around safety, which I've also added to one of the documents. That health and safety should be addressed and should be documented. In which document or which context that should be done, that's something for us to decide. But there should be standards defined on safety. Finally. There is a combined interest in getting some end users involved when it comes to larger scale operators to also move towards practical deployments and testing and validation of certain principles, but also to guide this work stream in what would they like to see as a result, what would they like to be working with to establish a good set of requirements for all of us to move towards. In general, this is a summary of what's discussed during the Open Compute Summit in Amsterdam. If there's anything I've missed or something, if anyone has some questions around this, feel free to speak up now.
Quick question, Rolf. So I know after the summit, there were some discussions between you and Caleb and Steve as well regarding just the nomenclature that we'll be using and how we define kind of data center facilities, rack, rows, and so on. Has that discussion been going on after that, or is that something that we need to align with between the work streams? I know you mentioned it quickly here.
Yeah, no, that was a very interesting discussion. It had to do with how you should define the water infrastructure based on energy use or types of technologies, and this is something that should belong in the harmonization work stream. What we did there was mostly philosophize on different ways of dealing with this. So indeed, it's a relevant. It is a very relevant piece of the part of the equation. The idea was to come up with a certain row definition where a certain water volume or energy volume would be would be harvested from the facility. There's no final conclusion that we came to. Basically, the conclusion was, okay, this is something that needs work, that needs a lot of thought, that we need to figure out with the different work streams combined.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay.
Hi, Magic speaking from DCX here. I had just one humble request. I didn't saw that email probably because I was not able to subscribe to the new mailing list. So after that call, would you be so kind and just resend all that documents which we see on the email?
Yeah, there should be. I'm not sure. Are these emails still logged on the OCP site, Agnar?
I'm sorry, one more time? Are these emails?
The email with the documents, the links to the different documents, is that something we can work into in the project definition on the OCP site, or is this email logged as part of previous mailing lists?
No, it should not be locked at all. Anybody that is now part of the OCP ACS Immersion, mailing list should have access. We can also put this up on a wiki page if that makes sense.
Yeah, probably. I think that might be a good idea. Is that okay with you? I'm not sure who was just speaking from DCX. Yes.
Will that work?
Okay, I think it will work. Let's approach it like this, like that.
Okay.
At the very least, after we validated that these are the right documents to start with.
Okay.
Okay, so I've prepared 5 documents to work with. It's 5 because there are some fundamentally different topics. First one is related to the data center interfaces when it comes to the water infrastructure, where we can define standards on piping, on type of connectivity to the water infrastructure. The second one is related to management interfaces to connect to the data center infrastructure management or to get specific statistics out of the immersion solutions. The third one is related to regulatory requirements. Whether they apply or not may depend on different regions, but it needs to be mapped in some way. That's one of the results of the previous meetings. The IT gear specs, which also contains the wetted material lists and design guidelines for manufacturers for designing specific immersion-ready solutions. And some best practices, which are more generic towards the also the proprietary solutions, but also to the way of work with immersion systems. What I would like to do is I've just made a very basic proposal of some of these documents based on the previously established content. One of these documents I've already provided some content where I can add some information as a participant. And I would just quickly like to go through them and see if there's anyone who's interested in maintaining these documents or adding value to these documents, so we can establish some names, some names to the content that needs to be generated. And the first one is the data center fluid interface definition. I assume that if you all can you all see my screen?
Yes.
We can see it.
All right, cool. Basically, it's a fairly short document, but it's a separate one because this also feeds into the harmonization layer. I've made a small table with something that I consider could be a way of presenting some information. I would like to request her to provide me with some input on this. And is there anyone in particular who would like to create this list in a more specific with more specific requirements. And starting with the interface diameters, this is mostly based on science and data center best practices. Is there anyone in the call who has specific knowledge or experience on this? Okay. So one of the ideas to present the information is a table where we can differentiate with different solutions with different mass flow rates which are required, and the type of diameter pipes and the type of interfaces that are required for it, but possibly also a solution type classification. Is this does anyone have some feedback on whether this is a good way to present this type of information?
This is Phil Tuma with 3M. Are you able to hear me?
Yes. Hi, Phil.
Hi, how are you? We have some experience in this area, and obviously there's a wide range of power capacities per tank. So I think there'd be quite a wide range of pipe diameters and such, but the fittings that have been used in two-phase immersion, at least, are pretty standardized. I could provide some input there with the help of Allied Control.
Good. That would be great. Okay, let me. Doesn't seem like I can edit this at this point in time. I'll just.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do it right now. I need to do some offline research, but I'd be happy to contribute some content there.
Okay, cool.
Oh.
I'm having some problems in editing this at the moment. I'll make a note separately. I'll update the documentation, and I'll make sure that we can at the next time we can actually edit it online. Okay.
I do like the classification there of going from chassis level and up, but maybe we can put some definitions around also just the small tanks, medium tanks, of showcasing examples of that. And I agree with Phil that there would be wide ranges there depending upon really how much power that you put in.
Is it feasible to come up with a specific diameter type? I mean, BSP is something that is quite common here in Europe. How does it work in the States?
We like NPT, but we're often forced to use BSP in the US. I think either works.
So when it comes to OCP, is this something that OCP would define as a standard in this case?
I'm not sure if we do standards. I think what we can do is make recommendations and put guidelines in place, Rolf, but we're definitely not a standards body, right? So I think we'd have to be careful how we position this.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Would this be more suitable as a best practice for interfaces that should be further discussed in the harmonization layer?
Yeah, I think if we present it as best practices, or if we present it as guidelines, this is the recommended guidelines from, OCP members, I think that's going to be received a lot better than just a standard. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've just made a note of that.
Do we call just a classification of, you were saying if we call it guidelines, does that still fall under the specs, or does that fall under a white paper?
I think it falls more under a white paper, because these are guidelines that we're recommending as a project community. They would not be part of the spec, because then that's only one. Okay. one person's implementation of it. So we could easily do it as a white.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you.
The white paper approach probably qualifies for most of the advanced cooling work at the moment, since it's all towards supporting proprietary solutions as well. Would you agree with that, Agna?
Yeah, exactly. I would agree with that. I think that right now what you have is a set of guidelines or a set of best practices and recommendations that you're making.
Okay. Now there's some. I'll continue to the next paragraph on this. In this case, then there's been some inputs based on another collaboration in the industry where some people have made remarks on inlet and outlet differentiation, where inlet and outlet specifications should not be identical to prevent any wrong connections into the data center infrastructure. There are some ideas that have been shared also at the OCP summit, but very briefly, on marking and specifying the inlet and outlet differently, whereas the inlet would have male interfaces and outlet female interfaces. Is this something that everybody would agree with?
She's disconnecting, Magic here. She's disconnecting and connecting the tanks. It's not a daily operation. I suggest that it should be basically performed by the technician. Maybe color coding would be completely enough to solve that one. And we will have less complexity.
This has been this is something that I actually received as feedback from 2 different organizations that have implemented large-scale liquid infrastructures already, where there have been instances of wrong connections to the water infrastructure, also based on very high-profile solutions, which are already in the market for a long time. Apparently the technicians who do this kind of work don't always know everything. So it's okay. So do you object against male and female interfaces, or you think the color coding should be sufficient?
I think color coding might be sufficient, particularly since in some of the larger scale systems, we're not talking about threaded couplings. We're talking about, more standard pipe unions and things of that type. 3-inch diameter pipes.
Okay.
So I'll try to get some input on the names of those conventions and how to describe them, but they wouldn't necessarily have a fitting per se. They'd make a union at the time of connection.
So what you're saying is it should not be impossible to connect it in the wrong way. It should be common sense to connect the right color to the right type of interface. That's what you're saying.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm not certain, but I think there may be instances where the pipes don't necessarily have a sex associated with them. In that case, they should be color coded.
Fair point. Okay. Anyone else?
I think that the color coding makes a lot of sense. I think the dissimilar connections, while it would be a nice to have, I think it would make interoperability and harmonization more difficult.
So you're aiming for do not create different interfaces, only color coding.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
I'm along those lines too, of that color coding should be sufficient.
Yeah. Okay.
But I also want to just dig into it. But from a harmonization point of view, you would think that would be easier as well, right?
Yeah.
Of aligning with rack infrastructure and so on.
Good. Okay, so if nobody else wants to add anything, then I suggest we move on to the next one, material properties. This is something that also has been put in. When it comes to the materials that are used, there's a lot of examples of facilities where different materials have been used in water circuits, but also in liquid solutions, where corrosion occurs or where other problems start occurring because of galvanic corrosion. This is probably more of a best practice guideline. The statement that I've put in right now is more or less a generic statement where the potential difference between the facility interface and the liquid solution should not exceed 0.2 volts. Although this also insinuates that it goes towards a standardization of pipe fittings. Is there anyone here that has specific ideas on how to address galvanic corrosion in this case? Nobody. Okay. Then I guess we'll leave that open for another time. And facility side water requirements. I guess that's also more towards harmonization. There are some basic principles applied to water circuits where filtration should be done in any facility. Is there something that are there any specifics that we should add to the facility side water requirements when it comes to immersion systems?
I wouldn't have much to say except perhaps to say that I envision these systems functioning like water cooling systems already in existence in this regard. You know, they're going to draw water as needed, and having a constant pressure feed is probably ideal for everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any specific filtration requirements for anyone? We'll leave that open as well for discussion. Is there anything that is missing in this document or should be added in some way? Okay, in that case, I'll consider this a document that is accepted as a starting point. Is there anyone that would object to that? That this is a document to work on? Okay. The second document is related to immersion management interfaces. This is something where I don't have any content yet, except for chapters that have been discussed in previous calls, and just a few things that are more generic that should be added or worked on, whether that's something that's specific. First of all, there's an interface. What type of management interface should be required? What type of data should be collected? And what type of alarming and protocols should be supported? And finally, also what type of things are related to the redfish integration, the OCP management system. Are there any specific, is there any specific interest from anyone to specifically work on the management interfaces?
So help me understand, if you would, this is Phil Tuma, which these are connections by which the tank would interface with the outside world if it was a tank, for example, or the individual immersion cooling unit, be it a rack or a tank.
Yeah, precisely.
These are the data that would pass back and forth, right?
Yeah, this is the data that which allows a data center environment to manage the, or at least to monitor or manage the immersion system, the immersion-based solution. Whether that's by controlling it or just by gathering information, or whether it's none at all. But if there is a management interface, it should probably be described or specified.
Yeah. So faults, for example, I see that. Yep, perfect. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
So with Asperitas, we do have a management interface, a management methodology. But again, this is something that is that should be more as generic as possible to allow all the immersion technologies to hook into management standards. So they should provide some guidelines on which items, if there is a management interface, what can be collected and what type of information should we want to have collected. So I've added some of the things that seem quite obvious, but let's have a look at this. So is there any specific type of interface that is already common in OCP? Is that Ethernet or fiber, or is that? I'm currently not very familiar with the way that the management interfaces work with the Open Rack solutions. Does anyone have experience with the Open Rack management interfaces? Agnar, is there anyone from OCP that we can add to this to provide some more specific information on management infrastructure?
The person that you'd want to invite is probably Steve Mills from Facebook.
Yeah.
He's probably the most well versed on Open Rack.
All right, cool. Yeah, he cancelled for today. Okay, but he should be present next time then, so that's good.
Okay.
Okay, but is there, instead of going through all the details right now, then is there anything in this document that strikes anyone as improper or should be added or shouldn't belong in there? Okay, then we'll use this document as a starting point as well. Are there any members in particular who would like to add to this documentation as well? Based on the lack of response, I assume no. Okay.
Maybe it would be helpful to have that discussion with Steve Mills first, of understanding of what they're doing, and then we can start signing up for this one as well.
Right, agreed. Okay, so I'll leave this as a basic document as well. The third one is regulatory requirements when it comes to immersion technology. Again, I understand this as a starting point. It can be a little bit difficult to get a good grip on this, but this is all sort of information that we probably need to assemble anyways in some way somehow. Anyway, I've stated some of the generic compliance elements that I am personally aware of. When it comes to type of certifications that are required to sell solutions in a certain region. Some of these are UL certification, CE certification in Europe. In case there are moving parts in the machine, there's a machine directive. There might be regulations regarding containment of liquids, and these should be described in some way, and solutions probably should be compliant with this type of requirements from different regions. Is this something that anyone has experience with at the moment, or does anyone know of any generic compliance or certification requirements that Immersion solutions should comply with at this point in time?
Just thinking out loud here. So, since I mean we're aiming at this document to really be valid any part of the world, right? Do we want to divide it up into different regions as well? Of different regulatory requirements can do exist in different parts of the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that should definitely be. UL is United States, CE is Europe, or at least European Union. That is. A machine directive is also at least a European requirement. I'm not sure if there is a machine directive in the United States, whether that's an international. But yeah, it does make sense, I believe, to assign regions to the different compliance requirements. Yes.
And there are different IEC regulations as well that needs to be adhered to, and so on, right? So this is quite a big scope as well, right? If we were to cover everything and all the latest details in those. But I mean, at least being able to put links to them, right, of what's going on and discussions that are ongoing in those different regulatory bodies.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. Anyone else who has some ideas on this? Okay. The current division is on generic compliance, dielectric liquids, that there are requirements on spill management when it comes to oil-based solution. I'm not sure whether there's any compliance issues when you're talking about the 3M liquids or Solvay liquids. There's also fire prevention and firefighting specifications that apply to different types of liquids. But then there's also electric compliance and health and safety compliance. Are there any more classifications or main groups of compliance issues that should be added to the chapters?
Yeah,
do we want to have environmental there in as well, or does that go under health and safety? Is that what you were going to say, Phil?
That's exactly what I was going to say, Jess.
Very good. Environmental. I'll add it as a separate chapter. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I'm not sure there are a lot of regulations, but there's certainly conventions and best practices.
Yeah. Would that fall under generic? No, probably not. No. Would that environmental? Would it not mostly focus on the dielectric liquids?
I believe so.
I'll add it to
the use of them.
Yeah. So when it comes to a physical build, a physical device, whether it's steel or plastic, I don't think that matters so much, but it's mostly about the liquids inside, correct?
I believe so. Yeah, greenhouse gas emissions, groundwater contamination, things of that nature.
Yes. Okay. Good. Any specific subtopics that should be mentioned here when it comes to dielectric liquids or electric, health and safety?
Do we want to say anything about the incentives there? In some parts of the world, I mean, regulations, but you also have some government incentives. Or does that go somewhere else?
That's a good question. That's more related. Would it be related to OCP best practices or white paper style environments? It's an interesting one, because there are a lot of areas in the world where there are indeed a lot of incentives, although they tend to fluctuate a lot and be out of the control of best practices or common standards, right?
Yes. They can spill into regulatory requirements, right? But yeah, I think that's one up for discussion. So where to potentially put that in, if that is something that OCP wants to mention as well.
Yeah, something that we could do, though, is to describe at the very least that with certain types of solutions, incentives may apply. And if there is somebody who is enthusiastic about describing the different types of incentives, then we could add a little list to it, probably. But more as a generic, as a more generic description of what the potential could be, I guess. I'll try and work it in there for the next meeting in some way. So is there anything else that should be added or discussed in this one? Okay, so if not, then I'll classify this as a document as well. And we go to the IT gear specs. This is one where where we have already added some information from our own experience within Asperitas. So I've taken the liberty of providing some generic information. This is a document where material compatibility needs to be addressed, the weathered material list, some generic information on guidelines and best practices for immersed IT, hardware compatibility, and also optimized liquid designs. So I've taken the liberty to put some Asperitas information in there. This is not meant as something that we necessarily need to position. It's just as a sample, some sample information that perhaps could be helpful for us to work on as a starting point. And I think I just lost part of that document. Let me just reload it for a second. The current division of chapter starts with material compatibility, where I've added some information on different materials and liquid compatibility items, like stickers, plasticizers, fans, some thermal compounds, EPDM rubbers based on mineral oils, relays, items that are known to be to require attention when building IT. Let me start with the question: is this something that should be a starting point when it comes to web material list and material compatibility? And is this something that anyone wants to add to, or has some information already to share?
Hi, Magic here. Oh yeah, go on.
Oh, I apologize. This is Phil Tuma. I just added. I think that this section looks very interesting. It's going to vary very widely by fluid chemistry and the nature of the immersion technology, I think. So I think it's going to take some thought on how best to partition these so that they're clearly, easily read and people can see what they're relevant for which technology. But it's a very involved and very, very deep subject.
Yeah. So what I've done here is I've defined just a table for now. I don't think this should be the final format. So it's the format in which we can start collecting some information, which we could later on put in a more like a database style structure. But this is something that I set up as something that could be a good starting point to start collecting information on different liquids and based on the experience of different liquid providers.
Rob, Magic here. I have just one question. Maybe it would be a good solution to just clearly diversify between those two solutions. I mean, fluorochemical fluids like Novec type of the immersion cooling and the oil-based cooling, because we are discussing the list and it must be they're completely different systems. So just my example.
Thanks. Currently in the tables that I've prepared, it contains a liquid type field. So to initially collect information, since we don't know how far it varies and which differentiation we should apply, I do agree that we have to distinguish between oil, chemical, and potentially even other types of liquids or types of solutions. Like I said, these tables will facilitate any type of liquid to be specified. So here are some references to any liquids versus mineral-based oils, which we have in particular some knowledge about, of course. We can distinguish. We can go as deep as we like with this, and then later on collect the information in a more separated or technology-specific list. But some effects with liquids are can actually be generic for all liquids as well. And these type of things we need to start assembling. That was at least the focus from the different previous interactions.
Sure.
Do you think this is not specific enough, or do you think we need a different format for this?
Well, I think that's it also refers to the field specifications when we were trying to specify the tags or and since that will be completely different tags with different features and different components, then maybe we should even create specific documents for the two types of the cooling systems, single phase and dual phase cooling systems, and maybe that will be more clear, because otherwise we will be creating the not true image that you can simply choose any of the coolants and just put it in the tank and that will work, which will not, right? So maybe we should structurize it better.
But are you referring to how do server components relate to the tank specification? I'm not really understanding what you're trying to say. Sorry.
Sure. I have a hard time because I didn't saw the documents. So if you resend it after the call, that would be great. I'm just saying as you are scrolling it on the screen. But I think that maybe it would be a good point to just structurize those documents and just divide it between two types of the cooling systems, not especially referring to that specific document.
You don't have. You're not seeing my screen, then, are you?
No, I see that. I see that really.
Okay.
No, I just didn't get that first email because it was sent probably before I was able to sign to that mailing list.
It was sent out this afternoon. So yeah, it's apparently if you have selected to receive consolidated emails or the digest, then you may not get it, then you may not have received it in time. I know that's a thing with the current mailing list anyway. So
Rolf,
Sure.
yeah.
If people on the call here can subscribe to the mailing list, that would be great because then they will get this. I have also added the 5 documents in your email to the wiki, so they can also now go to the Advanced Cooling Solutions wiki and download those documents and or work on them as needed.
Yay!
Okay.
Good.
So I'll put it here in the chat if anyone's interested on how to get there.
Okay, cool. Akne, if we can have a little chat afterwards to make sure that these documents can be edited online as well, because I'm not very familiar with the way that this is set up at the moment. So
Okay.
maybe you guys can provide me with some guidance on that.
Okay.
So I've taken a bit of position. We're running a bit out of time. We're approaching the end of the call. So there's not a lot of time to really go through the rest of the documents in detail. So this document and the last one that we haven't covered yet, Immersion best practices. Best practices doesn't have any content yet, just a few topics that or chapters that have been defined as something that people would like to see from this document. Is there? I understand that most of you probably don't have a good idea of what's now described in the IT gear specs documents. I would like to request that you all have a look through it and see where you would like to add things or where you want to get involved. It is possible to make notations in these documents. I do know that, so it should be possible to add some remarks based on Google Drive within Google Drive. So feel free to do so. And then we can go a little bit deeper into the matter in the next call.
Yeah, if you go on Google Drives, everyone, and you do not have a Gmail account, please put your name after your comments because it shows up as anonymous when we go to take a look at it. So when you add a comment, please add your name to the comment itself, unless you have a Gmail account and then you're logging in with your Gmail and it's identified. That really helps with the progress because then people know who's commenting. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So is there anyone who wants to add or ask something or feels like there's something still missing?
Yeah, just one quick question. I know that is end of the call. However, in terms of the server models or server components, are we still talking about immersing the standard typical servers which are installed in the open racks with all, or
Yes.
are we aiming to? Okay.
Yes. Now there's two. I know that Submer is that Daniel Pope is keen on working on the warranty guidelines for existing IT. I've taken up and I've currently provided some input on optimized service for immersion, but both angles will be covered and or should be covered anyway. So feel free to provide any inputs on either.
Rolf, so I have just one quick question. If you will be so kind and just clarify which exactly components or which exactly server models, just pointing out should be taken into the account, right? And the same for the busbar, the same for the power strip. I mean, so we know on which models are we working, right?
I cannot provide you with that information simply because I'm not someone who can decide on that. That's something that has to come from the workstream. And when it comes to specifications of which specific servers, I think that might be something to avoid in this case, simply because we want this to be as generic as possible and not provide a lock-in for a very specific server build or server architecture.
All right. That will make our job. And I mean, we can work on the as you mentioned, like black box basis, right? And just be a very general. Nevertheless, maybe it will be great if we have at least some starting points. I mean, those immersion tags must be built to use that specific servers which are OCP approved. So.
Yeah, so that goes mostly towards the OpenRec spec server. So if it's reverse compatible, I think it makes sense to assume the current standards for OCP chassis and OCP builds. But this document should provide all the information for manufacturers that they need to be able to support immersion technology, either with existing servers or with optimized servers, whichever is going to be implemented. To be honest, whatever we define now in the sense of a server model or a server type, by the time this document is finalized, that is already a legacy system, huh?
Yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, having we need to size to something, right? Right? We need to calculate the amount of the fluids, the pressures, the watts, and everything. So we need to start from something, right? Of course, we can assume that we will just fit the bus bars at the bottom of the tanks, for example, right? And just keep the size of the open racks. However, we should at least size the I mean, having general size of the tanks, right?
Well, that's the thing. We're not it's going towards black box in the sense that we're not going to specify fixed dimensions or fixed requirements. It's going more towards a best practices or white paper approach on how to facilitate immersion. So which type of things that should be avoided or which type of things are recommended. But when it comes to a specific server system or whether or not there is a busbar implementation, a busbar description should be towards specifying guidelines or recommendations. And if somebody wants to position an optimized busbar which is specifically suitable for immersion, as in a horizontal implementation where different considerations apply, and that can be included, I would assume. But I don't think it's the job of this workstream to define which servers will be worked with. Or am I misunderstanding you in your comments?
Sure, I get it. I mean, I always like to be more specific in terms of the component we are immersing and the way it is connected. So I'm just wondering how to do it, but.
Yeah, I do understand the difficulty. It's something that can be very difficult to work with, and I fully agree with that. To be very generic but specific at the same time, it can be very difficult. But we have to try and make sure that we remain agnostic for the different types of technologies that are out there related to immersion technology. at least for now, to stay within the spirit of what this workstream needs to achieve. But I think something we should be able to do is collect a list of systems that have been proven to be good with certain type of immersion approaches. Maybe that's another way of approaching this. Would that address your concern, Magic?
Sorry, I'm on the road having bad connection, but all right, I will add that to the schedule you are proposing and try to do some input here.
Okay. I think we've passed the time by now, so we need to work towards conclusion. There is one final topic that I would like to address. Some people have expressed some difficulties with the current timing, current schedule. Some of the guys from Orange have proposed to do the call 3 hours earlier. Is there any participation constraints when it comes to timing from anyone here? If we schedule the call 3 hours earlier is for me a little bit more difficult, but 3.5 hours earlier, is that something that is feasible for everybody?
Works for me.
Phil Tuna works for me too.
Anyone who it does not work for? Okay, then I'll.
Works for me.
Okay, thanks. So then for the next, I'll change the schedule to 3.5 hours earlier, which means Central European time. It will be from 4:30 to 5:30. You guys can do the rest of the math for the rest of the world till the time zones, but I'll send a note to change the schedule of the call then. So anyone else wants to add something before we end the call? Okay, in that case, I would like to thank everyone for participating in this call. I'm looking forward to hearing you again in 2 weeks from now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.